I was your age. I was maybe 27. And my
Whenever
boss
Ian tells you that he's always just a little bit younger to make him seem smarter. Now he's forgotten. He's probably 29, but it's never the way the story comes out.
Awesome episode today. We interview Zack B, who is a new manager trying to figure out how to navigate with his team. We give him some advice. He has some great questions, takes us through his career arc, what he's doing, and what he's planning to do next. So if you are a new manager or you have new managers, you're going to enjoy this one.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Matthews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Hey, we got a guest.
Woo-hoo!
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Big deal. We got Zack in the house. Zack, whose last name will remain anonymous because he has big plans to take over the world, and we want to make sure that the broad appeal of this podcast does not spread into all areas of his life and ruin some of his big plans.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm looking forward to
We
it.
could just brand you as Carson Wentz. The first time I saw you, it kind of looks like Carson Wentz with the headset. Get you a clipboard.
I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. We'll see.
So Zack, how did you find out about us? How'd you end up here on our podcast?
So I started with my wife, works for MVR Mortgage, who you both used to work for. And I was actually at a Maryland basketball game with her and a few other of her coworkers for a recruiting event. And one of them mentioned that you two had a podcast together. I listened to a lot of podcasts, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Not really expecting much, no offense, but it quickly grew into one of my favorite podcasts since then. And then you've mentioned a few times that you are open to having guests, and I thought I fit the bill for that, so I reached out. And yeah, here we are.
Man, that's pretty cool. We appreciate you following us, and we're excited to kind of dig in with what you're up against today. So what's your background a little bit? Where'd you go to school? What for? What was your major?
So my background is all in engineering. I studied computer engineering at Virginia Tech, where I graduated in 2015. Since then, I've been in the professional industry for 7 years now. Also in that time, I got my master's degree in computer science. So a very strong technical background. But over the years, as I progressed through my careers, I've been a programmer, software developer the whole time, but have been working my way towards leadership. And that's where I'm starting to get to now, which I'd like to discuss.
I like that you said I've been in the professional industry. Frank, it's been a long time since you and I have been in the professional. We've been like in the jackassery industry for a good decade now. We're running at it.
I feel like jeans have run their course. So I feel like it's time to kind of go back to slacks, but slacks really aren't what you want anymore. So it's like, do I wear like a pair of like nice Lululemons? Like these are the discussions that I have with myself internally about like the professional world. Like Ian mostly takes like conference calls in shorts and his wife and then a dress shirt. And his wife's like, "You on the phone with Asia?" He goes, "Yep."
Exactly.
All business in the front and party in the back.
Totally. It works out really well for me. So right out of college, you go to Virginia Tech, you're hokey.
Exactly.
And out of college, I assume you went to some job fairs and did some interviewing like every other college kid and took a job at a big company.
Exactly. I did. It actually started in college. I interned at this company because they were local near where I grew up. So I knew of them. But yeah, I talked to them at a career fair, applied for an internship, got that internship. And did well enough that they asked me back immediately. So I didn't even really have to worry about looking for a job my senior year. I had it lined up the entire year and just got to enjoy the last year of college.
So did you choose computer engineering? Are you one of these kids that was always on a computer as a kid, messing around with Python and different programming languages? Or did you do it because you knew it would pay a shitload of money after college?
Actually, kind of both. I grew up a big sports fan, not much of a computer fan. I know most of my coworkers grew up playing video games. I was definitely not one of those kids, but I did take intro to programming in high school, which introduced me to programming. And so I fell in love with it in high school. So I knew going to college that I wanted to be either a computer programmer or something of that sort. But yeah, I definitely didn't grow up with video games and computers as most of my coworkers do.
Okay, so you go to work for Hughes, big ass company. What do they
Yep.
got you? What do they have you doing? Are you working as a developer when you're
Yep.
there?
Yeah. Just your low level, entry level developer. So the lowest man on the team taking the small jobs, but slowly working my way up to learn the product and the system. But yeah, the entire time, I'm just developing new features, help debugging features in the system. I was on call part of that time. They're an internet service provider. So if something goes out, it needs to be fixed immediately. So there were a couple 2 a.m.s, 3 a.m.s that I was getting calls to look into issues. But yeah, mostly just developing and fixing
Just
bugs and
largely
features.
troubleshooting code for the most part. Is that?
Troubleshooting code. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay.
Code that I wrote and broke and had to figure out. Yeah.
Got
Good way
it.
to
So,
learn.
so you kind of get used to a big company with a big company hierarchy, lots of layers of management.
Exactly. Yeah. They were a public company. They were the industry leaders. So it was, I learned a lot there. It was nice.
And how long were you there for?
Just about 2 years
Okay.
before I moved on to my next role.
And then you moved on to something a lot different size company at least.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had no intention of leaving that first company. But while I was there, I was getting my master's on weekends and evenings. And through that, I met a guy. I had a class with a guy who started a company, a startup company that had a technology focus, and he was looking to recruit engineers to help him build a product. So he pitched me, asked me to join the startup, and I actually said no at first. But he was persistent and eventually talked me into it. And I decided that while I was young, that was my chance to try a startup. So yeah, I joined a startup company as employee number 4 that had no product and helped them build that from scratch. So it was quite a big change from an industry leader that's been around for 20 years.
So how did you justify, how did you rationalize the decision to leave something very safe, a safe salary, 401k benefits, pretty clear career progression to something that's a pretty big risk?
Yeah, it was tough. So like I said, I enjoyed my job, but I had always also been starting to pick up an interest in business type things and people management and things like that. And there was no clear path, at least anytime in the near future at the large company to get there. Whereas at the startup, I would have a hand in everything. So that was one of the draws. Also, just having a fiance at that time and a wife who was supportive of, and both financially and mentally. But really, I wanted to learn, and I figured this was my chance to try something like this. If it went ass up and I was out of a job in a year or two, I figured I can go right back to my original job. But yeah, while young, take the risk, try it out, learn, and see what happens.
I believe the correct term for that is tits up.
All right.
That,
Yeah.
that,
Next
that's,
up.
that's our favorite. And there's a sweet spot there, right? Like there's a period in time where it makes sense to take a risk. You got 2 incomes, you have no kids. Like it's the moment.
Exactly. And I was about to get married, so I can hop right onto her health insurance and not have to worry about that. So that was the big deciding factor too.
Smart. Yeah, real smart. So when you're employee number 4, it almost feels like you're one of the owners because when there's only 4 people in a company, everyone's doing a little bit of everything.
Exactly. Yeah. And I hadn't mentioned that earlier, but that was part of the upside too, as well as even though it was a pay cut, there was ownership of the company at stake. So the chance to grow something and profit from that. But yeah, also being able to define what the product would actually be was interesting since there was no product at that time.
So that was part of the allure as you were in the cap table. You were one of the owners, equity owner.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The company had been around for a year before me, but mostly in a research phase. So I'm not labeled founder or co-founder, but I was one of the building members, and I own equity in the company still.
What was the product?
It was construction management software. So it's a web-based tool to help commercial construction products manage all their documents, all their communications between one another. So yeah, and I had no background in the construction industry or anything before that, so that was new to me as well.
So I'm more of a construction guy than Ian is. So it would track what, like everything from budget to schedule and
exactly. Yeah, and it's for commercial construction products. Yeah, so a lot of RFIs going in and out of it, but yeah, budget, all communications between owners, subcontractors, contractors, document changes, drawings, all your standard document stuff.
And you were there for 3 years. How did the product sell?
Okay, so it took a year for us to even build a product. So the whole first year was heads down building. Meanwhile, the CEO was talking to potential companies. And once we got a product, we caught a pretty good break where the owner knew a a construction manager down in a big project in Baltimore that was about to start. So we were able to get right away, as soon as we went to market, one large product. And that kind of served as our experiment. We didn't push selling a lot after that so that we can focus on this one product to meet their needs, incorporate their feedback into our company. And then over the next couple of years, we were on a slower sales path, something that, by the time I left, we only had like 4 or 5 projects on the system, but these are all million or billion-dollar products. So the income wasn't growing fast, but it was enough to cover our expenses.
What was your interaction like with the customer? Is that your first time where you had heavy involvement with the customer?
It was, yeah. And so my interaction was I would go to most of these meetings, the whole company was, since it was 4 to us. And I was mostly listening from a technical perspective to hear their feedback as to what features they're looking for in the product, for people who are already using the product, what they think needs to improve in order for them to sign a contract with us. But yeah, I was in pretty much all the sales meetings to listen to that. And it was my first direct interface with the company, with the customer.
I'm curious about your arc. So what you start to when you leave, curious about like the different jobs and kind of the interfaces. And I'm also curious, like, how did you leave and remain an equity owner?
Because it was so small, my arc when I joined, I was just me and one other developer building from scratch. We didn't have titles, but yeah, just developers. That other founding developer actually left while I was there, so I kind of assumed the lead developer role. And we hired 2 other developers while I was there. So we had a CTO, so I never like made it up to CTO, but I was, by the time I left, the lead developer. And how I kept ownership of the role, of the equity, is that just in my contract, after being there for 2 years, that had vested. So I already have them. I am not gaining any new equity. And if they were to change their structure, that could affect me. But yeah, basically it just had vested at that time.
It would survive a sale though. So there's some protection in there.
Yeah, there should be. There was a lot of paperwork that I didn't understand at the time, but but yeah,
I remember the first time I was presented with ownership documents. I was at NVR, and I didn't have a legal team back then. I didn't know who to call. And I remember like I didn't do anything with it for like 2 weeks, and somebody called me and like, "You doing anything with that?" I'm like, "I'm just too busy." But it was my way of not wanting to admit like I'm overwhelmed by this. I don't know who to talk to.
exactly.
And as you get a bit broader, like Ian and I have talked about our corporate counsels or people we work with, it's like you just forward the email, they read it, and they give you the bullet points. It's like so much easier to digest and think you have to do it all by yourself.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I pulled up Google probably 5 times and then just shoved the papers back on my desk before I actually filled most of them out.
If you're reading a legal document, you're either going to Google or you're going to YouTube to figure it out. It's probably time to use 411 or call one of us and say, hey, who should review this?
Yeah, going to a lawyer and accountant probably wasn't smart at the time, but
yeah.
So you're there for 3 years. From the time you got there to when you left, how did you change? How did you, I kind of look at every stop in someone's career as you either stayed the same or you got more valuable. It's rare that you go down, but how were you a more valuable person after 3 years of working in such a small company?
Right. Yeah. So when I first joined there, I was all technical and all I cared about was building the product and building the best product that I could. But once we got the MVP up and we got customers started to use the product, I kind of realized that our bottleneck wasn't the technology. The bottleneck instead was just finding new customers and finding a product fit. And there was some disagreement in the company over that. Some people thought that we just needed more features in order to sell more. And so I quickly became to be more attuned to what features are actually needed, what bugs actually needed to be fixed. Started to make more pragmatic decisions based on, maybe perfecting the technology at this time isn't what's going to best help this company. And instead we should look at processes or business management to help the company. From over the time, I went from completely technical looking to taking a more pragmatic view from like a product ownership type perspective.
And in your opinion, looking back on it with the advantage of hindsight, did the company need more features or did it need to be more aggressive in finding leads?
That's a good question. Hard to say, actually. I would still say that we should have been more aggressive in finding leads. I see that as having 2 cons. Either you get the contract and you get more money coming in, or you don't get the contract and you get feedback, and that feedback will tell you exactly what features would need to be added. We were kind of just going on insight at the time. So the company is still around, still bringing in money. So I can't say that the strategy didn't work, but it is also still about the same size as I left it. So if that's what the CEO intended for it, then that's great. But that's also part of the reason why I left is I was looking for more growth.
Yeah, if they're not growing in 3 years, if you're not growing, you end up becoming obsolete anyway. So I think your intuition of let's get some business and figure out features along the way. I would say that most great companies, that's what they do. They get, it's called a MVP, minimum viable product.
Yeah.
You're in the tech industry, you know that one, but go get the customers and then listen like hell to them on what they wished your product could do more of. But I think a lot of companies get so focused on making the perfect product and thinking if we just have a perfect product, everyone's going to come. But it's mythical. Really, it's just, in my opinion, that's just procrastinating, because you don't want to put yourself out there and have people say no to you on a product that may be missing a couple features, but it could still do the job.
Yeah, well said. Completely agree. And that was something I learned over my 3 years there. I definitely started with the technical only mindset of making it perfect.
Yeah.
As a construction management software, what do you think of Excel?
So that's one thing that we were trying to help replace. But honestly, Excel has some good features. It just gets slow when you got too much going
Kind of an
on.
inside joke with Ian and me.
So I'll tell you the inside
You
joke.
Excel fans or no?
Well, no, Zach. So, well, yes, we are because we're old. But I went to this real estate seminar, and Frank was featured as he was leading some, I don't know, some small group what are they, breakout session. And the topic was software. For some reason, Frank is talking about software. Who's like, there were like 20 breakout sessions, and of all of the sessions, Frank shouldn't have been in this one. He should have been in the other 19.
Ian's memory is flawed. There was multiple things in this session, but the thing that came up where I really stood out to be out of my depth was software.
And I get into software, and like we go down this rabbit hole of 15 minutes of like, if we had better software, we would be running way better real estate companies. And they're just listing all these softwares that you should have. And it was like a list of 20. It was outrageous.
Oh, yeah.
And Frank, you could just tell, is getting irritated as hell with this group of owners. And finally, he's like, guys, he's like, I went from like 3 condos to 300 doors in Richmond in 3 years with Excel. And he just stares at them all. And he's like, software is not your problem. And like everyone stopped and looked around a little bit, and I'm in the back just giggling like, that's hilarious. He just took all these guys to task. It was like, I built an empire with chewing gum and rubber bands.
It's a good point though. Yeah, there's like that joke where you have 20 software products, so you get one more to replace them all. Now you just have 21 software products,
21, and still the same number of frigging revenue.
Exactly. Yeah,
nothing's better.
So yesterday I was in an interview with someone, and I asked him a question. I was like, you seem like a job hopper. And he's a salesman. So like, I wasn't really sure he was a salesman until this very moment in the interview. And he goes, yeah, I've jumped a lot, but I can tell you every reason why I left. So I thought that was a great pivot. And I really thought it was something I'm going to ask going forward. It's a great question. So I'd like to ask you that, like you've left roles and you've left companies, right? So what we're going to talk about today is you're moving kind of with the battlefield promotion into a new role. So I think for the first couple, why don't we talk about why you left? We've touched on a little bit, like what were the greener pastures you were striving for? And then in your current role, like what do you hope to get to? Or what's the reason you want to leave that? Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, exactly.
Start with the tech startup. Why'd you leave? You're there 3 years. Was it just stagnant? Was that it?
Yeah, it was pretty much stagnant at that point. I stopped learning. I stopped being challenged. I thought I was hoping to hire more developers and increase my role a bit more, but since we weren't generally selling more, that wasn't on the table. So yeah, I was looking for the next challenge at that point. I just felt I wasn't growing anymore. So I joined the company, like I said, to take a risk and to grow and to learn. And after 3 years, I thought I got all I could out of that company. So that was why I started looking for what is now my current company and job. So that kind of explains the first two, but that's a good question because my resume now shows I've been at each company about 2 to 3 years before I've changed either companies or roles.
Honestly, though, don't worry about any of that. That's a qualifying question. I think you just said something that I want to stick in your head, and I don't even know if you said it, but you said, I got all I was going to get out of that company. And that is the right mentality in your career. I'm going to just stop for a second and give you the advice here. too many people think that they owe the company something more than they do. Your job, you were hired to do a job, which is build a product, help grow a company. And in return, you would get some career growth, you would learn, your skill set would get broader, and you'd get paid. And you gave the company for 3 years everything you told them you would. You built a product, you listened to customers, you built features. And in return, you grew to an extent. And when you stopped growing, you were smart enough to say, I'm not going to just stay here because of some misbegotten sense of loyalty. I'm gone because I'm no longer getting anything from this company. And that answer is fine. Then, like, it is on the company to keep you. It is not on you to stay with the company. So I hope that that mentality stays with you, because that's the way a career should be. As long as both parties are getting a mutual benefit, then you should stay and the company should keep you. But whenever that teeter-totter starts to go on either side, if you're no longer providing the same value, company will flick you out. And if the company is no longer adding to your career, you flick them out. That's the way this thing works.
Exactly. Yeah, that's great.
I think there's 2 ways to go about that, right? Some companies don't have the ability. With a 4-person company, you don't have an ability to do something else. But I've worked with people who kind of, in their resume, it looks like every 18 months they turn over, but they're really good employees. So what I do with those employees is have a conversation about, like, all right, I've seen this pattern, why? And they're like, I get bored. Like, well, do you like working here? Yes. Can we help you grow? Yes. Maybe before you get bored, let's have a conversation about what's next, and you can continue to grow. But there's a combination of what, and hopefully you find a place you could do that. But if not, I agree with Ian 100%. You got to look out for number one.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there. I think getting bored at roles too is something I've thought of in the past, but in an interview that might be a little scary to say, because as you're touching on, you might indicate to the company, well, I might be bored here in the next year or two.
Yeah, take your wife, take Emily. She joins the company, knows nothing about real estate, knows nothing about home building.
Exactly.
She starts in a very basic role that's customer facing at the very end of the process. And it's exciting. She's learning, she's having to be organized. She's having to learn how to work within a team, learn the business. Very quickly, she becomes the best in the office at it. And she does it for a while, and it's fun and it's exciting for her to get better at it. But if we'd have said, this is your role, she'd have been gone a year later. But instead, we were like, you're really talented and you could be doing more here. And we were big enough where we could do that. What do you think about sales? What do you think about loan officer job? What do you think about underwriting? We gave her a lot of different options because we were smart enough to see she will keep repaying us, but she will get bored because she's super talented. And that's how she stayed at that company 7 years, is we found different things for her to do, identified them on a career path. But a small company might not be able to do that. And, you have to make those decisions for you, because the company's not thinking about your career. The company's thinking about, how do we survive next month? What do we do?
Exactly. Yeah.
They'll tell you they're thinking about your career, but really the company's thinking about being a good company. So you are the only one thinking about your whole career.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I try to keep that mindset in place while I'm looking at what I'm currently doing.
Yep. So this next role, you've been there for 3 years. How does the opportunity come to you for your third company that you've worked for? How did you get the opportunity, and how'd you make the decision?
So once I decided to leave the startup, I was just in full job search mode. So just on LinkedIn, Indeed, Googling, interviewing at a bunch of companies. And after interviewing for a few companies and getting a few offers, this was what I thought sounded the most interesting. So just found it off LinkedIn and ended up getting an offer to be a software developer still. So a similar role to what I had been doing. And joined the company. It's a government contractor, so that was also something completely new and gave me the chance to get a security clearance. So that was attractive as well. But yeah.
Does a security clearance help get you into like VIP areas and clubs? Is there any value outside of work? No.
I was probably the opposite. You're not supposed to advertise it too much. So if I'm using it for those purposes, I'm probably going to get into trouble.
Yeah. Well, Frank just uses hand hundies to get us into the VIP areas. Now that we're older,
It's
but
probably much more effective.
Depending on how late
security
at night it
cameras.
is and how early we start drinking, it might be more than 100 to get this.
get me in. Frank can get himself in for 100, but usually I cost like 500 once it's late enough.
We got a buddy from Indianapolis. He's like, "What are you passing out 20s?" I'm like, "Have you seen yourself in the mirror?"
That's a good one.
So you get to this company and you join it right after COVID. So what is it like trying to fit into a culture and a new company right after COVID hits?
It was tough, honestly. So two things pretty much happened immediately. Is one, I realized while I was at the startup, I pretty much had blinders on the whole time, and I didn't recognize kind of the growth that was happening in my career while I was there. So when I went back to a larger company that had a good mix of senior to junior developers, I realized that I was much closer to the senior spectrum than I had applied for, and that I had.
Jumping back in, you realize your skill sets have changed pretty drastically. Like you're in a vacuum. You don't see that. You go back to the workforce and you're like, holy shit, I thought I was a junior. I'm a lot closer to a senior. And that's why movement is sometimes great. Keep going.
It was a surprise to me, but you're exactly right. So that fact alone, after a month or two of starting to get integrated, I started to get a lot of questions from the other team members. So I didn't have to go out and introduce myself to them a lot. And just from getting a lot of questions from them, it helped me to get to know them and helped me to get to know the team a lot better. But it was tough because we didn't enforce having cameras on in meetings or anything, and it was 100% remote. So I worked a year to a year and a half without ever seeing coworkers' face, without ever meeting them in person. But through answering constant questions, I felt like I got to know them, at least from an online perspective, fairly well. But I was actually looking to go into an office, so it was kind of bad timing for me that it was during COVID.
You had mentioned to us before the show that your responsibilities started to grow pretty quickly once you got into the company. How are you able to earn the respect of people around you in a remote environment where no one really sees anyone? How are you able to get more responsibilities, and how did that play out?
Yeah, so I always try to make my boss's life easier. And along with me, we hired a few other people. So my boss's team was growing and growing. And he started to have too many people than he can account for at one time. So I started just kind of naturally to take ownership of the people that I worked with more closely on the team. And then I didn't actually ask for it from him initially, but he asked me to take kind of official ownership, not in an HR perspective, but more take day-to-day responsibility of a sub-team of our team, just to kind of take things off of his plate. So yeah, I was really just trying to help my boss out and take things off his plate to do what I could.
Man, you said a couple of things there that are just uncommon for someone as young as you are. One, making your boss's life easier. So many employees don't really think about work like that. And really, if you take it to its simplest thing, the beautiful thing is you've been in a startup. So I think maybe part of your mentality of that so early in your career is because you worked in a 4-person office and you were the fourth. When you join a startup that small, what are you trying to do? You're trying to make the founder's life easier. He's spending money on you because he's admitting, I'm stressed and I don't have time to do some stuff. So in a really small company, you're just taking the founder's just throwing stuff around, like, here, take this, take this, take this. And you're almost pulling it off of him because he's used to doing it all himself. So it's pretty cool that you learned that mentality right away of make my boss's life a little bit easier to show value. I think, I don't know, Frank, if you have anything to add on that, because I think so many people that start in huge companies and they're there a long time, they don't think about work the same way that he's mentioning it.
Like if you look at like fictional characters, right? Like you think about the guy in Office Space with the stapler. Probably the worst example of an employee out there, right? Like I staple this and I move it from here to there. And I think people fall into that. Like that's what we do. And like with my company, we have a lot of, like, people sometimes struggle with our pace and how much we do and what we get done. But what you said is something that I would have pulled out of you in an interview, and I would have loved, and I would have gone into sales mode immediately, because what you just told me is I have big picture vision. I can see that. And no matter whatever role you're in, everyone's got a boss, right? If you're making your boss's life easy, what starts to happen for you? Like with this mentality, I won't answer it. I'll let you answer it. Like when you figured that piece out and you started to make that transition, right? Because it didn't happen immediately, but it happened at some point in your career. What started to happen for you?
Yeah, it helped me achieve my goals because it was my goal to become a leader in the company. So by taking that off his plate and him asking me to officially be a leader of a team, that was the quickest path to achieving my goals.
And typically it doesn't just happen immediately, right? What starts to happen is there's a progression. What was the
Exactly.
progression? What was the progression like? You go from like coding every day to what?
So now being responsible to 1 people, then 2 people, then 3 people, to eventually where I'm being handed a feature pre-design level, and I'm having to do the design and pass off the coding specifics to my team members.
And is that formal? Is that something where your boss is saying, "Hey, look, Zach is the lead on this. You're going to take direction from him." It's kind of like your project lead on a number of things, and Zach's leading it. So I'm going to need you to give him so no one's
Exactly.
you don't
Yeah.
have people, saying, "Why am I having to answer to Zach?" He's clearly clearing the path for you.
Yep. Yeah, it was formal. It's a common software thing to have morning stand-up meetings, 15 minutes for everybody to report their progress.
Little scrum
The
action.
exactly. And I was asked to split off from the main scrum and to take my team and run my own scrum. So they knew clearly that I was the leader of that team and that we were a little separated from the larger team.
You're running a scrum. You're big shit. You're big shit. Don't forget, Frank, I'm a tech startup guy. Don't forget, I scrum it up. I scrum it up, bro.
Clearly, I come for all my tech needs with Ian. So I want to give you something here that I think it's a reason that I think is worth diving into a little bit, right? So Ian and I are a long time since like the other end of the spectrum, right? The add value, the please the boss, that stuff, right? But for most people who are younger in their careers, there's a point where that was really important. So inside the mind of a manager is this: you're just some dipshit that's HR said hire. So you come in, and at first there's absolutely very little value add. None. Like, is this person actually, how much time are they going to take away from me or my manager in order to become proficient? And then you become proficient. And then what happens in most instances is as soon as someone's proficient, they're like, what's next? Right. And then so you're just always an annoyance. It's kind of like fucking children. But then what you start to get to is I start to realize, okay, this person's proficient and this person has a capacity. So what happens typically is you get better jobs, you get better things to focus on, you might get a little bit bigger scope. And then corporate America doesn't necessarily pay the player. They pay the coach. The CEO is a coach. They make the most. But you go from player to player coach. And that's when you get your small scrum, right? And then once you get your small scrum, and then it's like, okay, then you get the whole scrum, and you've gone from player coach to actually coach. But that's kind of can you use your words and kind of explain how that has happened for you?
No, yeah, that makes complete sense. So like I said, it kind of happened, and like you said too, it kind of happened naturally in that I was already starting to take on a lot of the questions and help them out a bit. But yeah, at some point it became official. I got the title like Scrum Master, became player coach, like you said. And that also helps solidify for them, for these more junior developers, to know that I am officially that role and that I am officially the one they can trust to go to for some issues.
So there's a common employee that Ian and I both have. We have a couple of them. But one of them came to me a couple of days ago and he goes, I've come to the conclusion of what makes you and Ian special. Like, okay. And he told me what it was. And I'm not going to tell you and I make you figure it out, but we're going to get to it. So you become a young manager. If you want to become a much larger manager, if you want to chase that kind of path, what would you imagine the differences between a good manager and a great manager?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure that out now. And actually to take a little step back, is at that time, my title, even though I was Scrum Master, was still software developer. So I was still very
That'll happen a lot of times.
Exactly. Exactly.
They
Yeah.
can pay you less that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
But so now I'm officially taking on some manager roles from an HR perspective. And what I'm learning pretty quickly, what makes a good and great manager, is I'm having a hard time delegating tasks that I used to do that I can no longer do. And it's hurting my performance, probably hurting my team's performance. So a great manager probably has trust in their team and can hand it off to them and then focus on the larger picture things.
Ian, the person is Harry. What would you think he said about you and me both that made us different from anybody else he's worked for? We were mentors.
I wouldn't venture to guess.
Yeah, it's mentors. So like what you're in this weird spot, right? You're trying to figure out that crunchy spot between where you were and where you're going. And what you're going to find is you're going to find a handful of Zacks, people who want to make their boss's life easier. Those are the people you really invest into. And then what you do is like, have you ever had that feeling? Like I've had this feeling where like like I looked up to somebody else and I was like, man, I wish someone looked up to me that way. But what you forget and you don't realize is people do, but you just don't feel it because you're the one they look up to. But like, does that make sense?
That makes sense. However, you're right. I definitely haven't realized it or come to that realization yet. So I don't feel like currently there's anybody looking up to me, but
So let me,
And if you
Frankie,
think
for
of-
1 second, let me,
Go ahead.
before we jump there, I'm curious on the transition. So we've gone from developer, Scrum Master, and Scrum Master is kind of just, that's an extra task you're doing as a developer.
Exactly.
So something you said is really important that you should continue to lean in on the rest of your career of, I just started doing things before they gave me the title. That's another thing that is uncommon, Zach, that I find in especially in a lot of young people. It's kind of like, well, you want me to do that? Are you paying me more? Do I have a new title? And it's like, no, go yourself. Just do it. If you want the title, if you want to get promoted, if you want a title, if you want to get paid more, start doing things that the next highest paid person in the company should be doing. And then when that position comes open, it's just a natural fit for everyone in the office to say, well, Zach's kind of already doing it. There's no, we got to go out and find someone that's going to recruiter. There's no, let's have a panel. It's just Zach, do it. And it kind of sounds like that's what happened. Your boss quit and
Exactly.
your company was like, well, Zach's kind of doing a lot of what he was doing.
Exactly. Yeah. So 3 months ago now, my boss asked me for a one-on-one call and told me he was about to put in his 2 weeks. And the next thing that came out of his mouth is, I'm going to recommend you to take my job because I think you're the most qualified to do it. You're already doing a lot of my job on the team. So when he went to his bosses and told them, there was a bit of a process, an interview process, but they took his recommendation and that's how I ended up getting his role.
Yeah. I mean, I can't count how many times, Zach, we've promoted someone in an office and someone who didn't get the promotion asked to have a meeting with me and they were upset that they were picked over or not chosen or not even asked to interview or panel.
Mhm.
And the question is always, how much of that job have you been doing? Who comes to you? You want to be a manager? Tell me about the people you're mentoring right now. Tell me about the last person you onboarded. Tell me about the last time you raised your hand and said, let me mentor. How long is the line at your door from the new people asking just questions, and how patient are you with them? And then they stare at you and it's like, well, I'm in a different job though. I'm not in the management job. It's like, well, the person we gave the job to could answer yes to everything I just said, and they were in your job too. They just did it without the pay. You only want to do that job because it pays more and you want the title. You're not willing to do it unless you have those two things. And that companies don't work that way. Like, show me. You interview every day for the next job. You don't interview once and say, here's what I think I would do in this job. You interview every day, sometimes for 2 years, and then a position comes open. And what are you going to tell me in an interview that you haven't shown me 8 hours a day for 2 years? Nothing.
Exactly.
It's gonna be
Yeah. And that gets
bullshit.
to what Frank was saying. And I should probably look at myself as more of a mentor because that was probably something, even though I hadn't realized it, that was probably something that helped me get this position.
There's a crossroads you'll come to now, your next spot, people under you. So there was a role at Ryan. So I wasn't on the mortgage side, I was on the operations side, the home building side, but there was a role that I interviewed for, right? So I come to the company, I'm a project manager, I moved to costing, I moved to sales, like easy peasy, win every interview, no problem. Going from sales to sales manager, first time out of the chute, they gave it to somebody else. I lost the interview. Second time out of the chute, they didn't actually give me that job. They gave me a production manager job. So like, we have a curveball to give you. Third time out of the chute, I get the job. But now that I'm 15 years removed from it, I look at it and like, the first time I wasn't prepared. Like I did all the homework, but I wasn't good enough in the role and I wasn't good enough at leadership in the role. The second time I was probably qualified, but they didn't understand it. So they gave me a lesser role. And what I realized is I didn't get this job because they don't know that I'm good at this. And that's where I figured out the mentor piece. That's where I figured out I got 14 people who report to me. I'm not going to make one good. I'm going to make 10 of them good. I'm like, great. And then what they did the next time around, they're like, well, we've seen what you've done in this role. Can you do that here? And if so, how? And the question starts to change. So the roles are different. The evolution might be slightly different, but the process is the same. And I won every single interview by talking about this. When I transitioned, I went from being really crappy and understanding I was crappy at these things, figured out who was great at it, mimicked it, mirrored it, implemented it, succeeded, passed it down. And then if you can get into that recipe over and over again, you're going to be like, I worked at the Outback. I love the Outback. We talk about this all the time. Whenever I got promoted to the new job, I was terrible at the new job. And you feel like really bad at it. But then you have to master it. And then you have 2 jobs you were good at. You do the 3rd time, the 4th time. It's no different in your career. And does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good to know, because I definitely currently feel closer to that first interview situation you said you were in.
Yeah.
Because even though I did get the role, I feel not great at it. I feel pretty unprepared. Even though I was doing some of it in the past, there's aspects of it I definitely didn't see coming, and it's been tough.
So piece of advice, don't go tell your bosses that, but be brutally honest with yourself, and say, I have a little bit of imposter syndrome here, and stay humble and keep working those angles. And what'll happen in a short period of time, 3, 6, 9 months, we'll forget that you were once a newbie because you're being tenacious in your own development. And that comes back to what we talked about earlier. The company no longer serves me. You're going to find yourself bumping up against glass ceilings if you continue to do that. Ian and I did. We moved up a bunch, and we're like, there's greener pastures, man. And that's what we ended up doing. And you could be you can pick your path, but those are some of the things that could be in front of you.
Yeah, great. Well said. That's good to know.
So your boss recommends you and you get the job, or do they interview you, or?
There was an interview process, but it felt pretty informal and pretty just kind of go through the motions. It was pretty soon after that I was told that I would be taking on his role.
So you get a new title out of this?
I do. Yep. I went up actually. So that was another point of contention is he was titled manager. However, HR at a large company didn't feel my resume was ready for that. So they pushed back and just wanted me to bump me to the next software engineering level. So that's currently where I'm at. I'm still having some conversations, but yeah, HR blocked the manager title, even though I'm doing manager roles.
Companies are so stupid. I'll give you a funny example. So I went through this. I was your age. I was like maybe 27. And my
Whenever
boss,
Ian tells you that he's always just a little bit younger to make him seem smarter. Now he's forgotten. He was probably 29, but it's never the way the story comes out. So don't feel bad that Ian is, younger.
I might have actually been younger, is what's stupid about the story. Because I got to MVR, I was 28. So it was 27, 26, something like that. And my boss his title was vice president of sales, and he left to go to a different business. So he was out. And he recommended me. I went and I interviewed for his exact same job, and everyone really liked me. They all wanted me. They wanted me to move to Atlanta. I got the offer, and I was paid like a third of what the VP of sales was. And my title was going to be general manager of sales. Same job, same number of direct reports, same revenue, same profit center, same everything, different title, way different pay. And I was pissed.
Exactly.
I was like, because I knew they were going to do this, but he was just older than me. So they were saying, well, my experience, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, I do the job for a year and a half. I kick ass. And I'm still way underpaid, still have the stupid title, and I leave. That's when I left to go to NVR. The day I told them I was leaving, they were like, would you like a different title? And that was, my boss said that. He didn't care, but HR was the one that gave me the dumb title in the first place. That started making me bitter with the company and the pay. They offered me immediately. They offered to match what MVR was paying in the salary, and they offered the money I asked for a year and a half before, and they offered me the title the second I said I'm leaving. I said no, I leave. They put an older guy in the job. He gets the same title. He gets the money. And it's like the short-sightedness of companies is obnoxious a lot of times. So sometimes you have to be a little bit forceful to get what you want. And don't let HR control your career, because they're normally with crappy careers.
And this is where mentorship comes in. This is when, if there's somebody under you, if you fight for them, this is how you build a real team of people. So we have one of my very best friends since middle school. We refer to him a lot. Ian knows him now pretty well as well. But like, I talk about my team here, and he's in a really big job, and he's like, these are my guys. Like he's had 15 years with these people and he's been able to promote them and move them to a different job, and they've gone to different countries. But now that he's on this huge account, he's got his guys that he's built relationships with. Like you can do that. And like to Ian's point, hey, we're going to lose this up and comer. This is your conversation to HR or a senior. We're being imprudent here. We're going to underpay this person. And you don't have to go say, hey, I went and fought for you and got your raise. They're going to feel it and know it. And you're like, there's a line from a movie I love. I'm the hand up Mona Lisa's skirt. Like you're controlling the strings by doing these types of things, and it builds incredible loyalties and it keeps great people, which if the person had fought for Ian doesn't leave NVR. He doesn't know your wife. He doesn't know me. He stays in that lane and he flourishes there, but they were imprudent, and you could influence that. And that's the fun thing to me about leadership.
Yeah, and you said they'll feel it, and that's exactly right. My first boss out of college at my first job, he's the only boss I've had so far that I can say I really felt fight for me, even though he's never said anything of that sort. Unfortunately for him, it didn't work out, but that was just a weird circumstance.
And you're in this weird spot now. You talked a little bit about delegation. Like now you are starting to achieve through others. It's a very, very different sensation than achieving on your own. Like I don't do shit. I don't. Like it's like someone was in my office the other day. They're like, I can't see you sitting at a desk alone. I don't. Like there's no reason, like with the exception of the time I'm with Ian, the only time I don't have somebody else in this office with me, because that's how I work now. I work in concert with others, but like I don't do much. I kind of talk, but it's iterative over time, and you probably can't even sense what it would be like 15, 20 years from now. But that's the type of stuff that happens, and you have to embrace it.
Yeah, and that's something I'd like to talk about, that because that has been one of the biggest challenges for me. And I think there's two challenges there. Is one, just learning to trust my team members a bit more, because they are good team members and they deserve trust. But the second is, since I was an engineer my whole life, it's kind of hard to pass down these tasks that I want ownership of and tasks that mentally I'm curious about. And passing down those tasks that I want to do in favor of tasks that excite me a little less, like paperwork and things that I'm being asked to do now. So that's my biggest struggle right now. It's taken a lot of my time, and I feel like I'm less effective because of that.
So you're given new responsibilities. You have 7 people on your team. You don't get the title you want. They change your title, but they don't call you manager, but whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Are they, you'll get that at some point. Did you get a pay increase at least?
I did. Yes.
Okay. So you got a pay increase for doing extra. How was your team told that you were the new boss?
So when my boss left, he kind of mentioned that he didn't tell my team until about a week after he told me and went to HR. So at that point, things were already in the work, and he indirectly mentioned that I would most likely be taking over. And then shortly after that, about 2 days after that, his boss sent out an email to the entire programming announcing my boss's departure, and that I would be the one to take his position after that. So there was an email to the entire program.
And so that email comes out now. 7 peers now look up to you. You've now immediately changed in their eyes to a teammate, a peer, a buddy, to the boss. That happens the second they read the email. And some people's behavior doesn't change, but I assume some did. That's kind of how it works.
Exactly. Yeah. So the more junior people, I think in some sense already kind of looked at me at their boss. So their behavior didn't change much at all, even though now is official. But there are more senior people on the team than me. And even though they mostly didn't want this job, so there was no resentment in that sense, it's gaining the respect from them that even though I've been a leader for a while, they have 10, 20 years experience on me. And they now might have to listen to something that I tell them, and they might think they know best. So yeah, all the junior people, pretty easy. It's the more senior people that are a bit tougher.
People ask 2 questions of their boss of whether they like to work for them. Do I like this person? Do I respect this person? Those 2 questions. If you can answer both of those, very important. Do you need the like? No, not as much as the respect. I'd say the respect comes first, but you kind of do need the like a little bit. If I don't like my boss, I'm probably going to end up going somewhere else. So there's a fine line. What I see with new managers is they tend to either focus all on one or the other. They either really want to be liked, and so they become pushovers and they get dumped on by the people working for them. They don't lay the line down, and so they're not respected. Or they are so focused on respect me and my title that people start to think they're an ego maniac and they're a prick. And really you want to try to find some balance there of I'm liked, but I'm respected. What I say goes, but people like working with me. That's kind of the role model boss that any of us have had. And so you've got to kind of think through, okay, these 7 people who report to me, those are the 2 questions they're asking themselves right now. And I've got to answer those over time, if not today, but over time.
Good to know, because I focus on the like a lot more than the respect right now. At least I feel currently. I'm more looking to be liked. So as I progress, I should probably transition to, like you said, also try to focus on garnering the respect a bit more.
Did your company give you any formal training, any management training in this role to start?
Yeah, there was a few online courses that they provided with me, but nothing really more than that. So yes and no.
Okay. That's typical. You get some
Yeah.
kind of bull HR training. Nothing like 5-on-4 groups in depth training, Frank, that Frank has been through. That's why he's such a good manager today. But so you get into this role, and you did you have some one-on-ones with each person about how they'd like to be led, what kind of how this is going to work? Did you kind of sit down and try to get to know people and your relationship?
No, so I generally did not. So that's probably one mistake I made early on. It was kind of interesting timing in that the company had just done their performance review cycle. So officially, all these people had just done their performance review with my past boss. But now that my boss was gone, it was something that came across my mind. Hey, I should probably sit down, have a one-on-one convo with them, see if they're liking their job, see how that performance review went, and to see where I can help them go for next year.
How long have you been there? How long have you been their boss?
About 2 months now.
2 months. Okay. So honestly, this is perfect. You're 60 days in, you haven't let this get too far. You could do this tomorrow. Are you all in an office together? Or is it all virtual still?
It's about half the team is in office full time because of the security clearance nature of it, but half the team is still working from home full time.
Okay. So get into everyone's calendar in the next week, and we can help you out with a list of questions you can ask, but get into everyone's calendar, 1 hour. I just want to talk to you. I've had 60 days to observe. Here's what I see your strengths are. And then list them, right? Genuinely, here's what I see your strengths. You're hardworking, you're smart, you're a good problem solver. I think you're a good teammate. And here's a couple examples where I saw good teammates, blibbity blah, right? Go through their strengths. What have I missed? What strengths do you want to share with me that you think I've missed? But here's what
That's
I've
a good
seen.
question.
Here's what I've seen in 60 days. What do you think I've missed in saying that? Okay. Here's where I think you're performing. And I'll give you some tangible things that I've seen in 60 days. Forget the performance review. That doesn't matter. That's the old boss. He left. I'm here. You're getting the opinion. They care about what their boss thinks of them and how you're doing. Here's a few things that I've seen that you've done really well on. A couple of projects. Here's some things in the Scrum that I'm seeing that I really like out of you. Here's some things you've moved along. Here's a few things that I think you could be applying your strengths better, right? So now this is the second part of this, right? This is not, here's what you're screwing up and here's what your weaknesses are. Screw weaknesses. We all have them, but don't focus on them because they can't change it. But I told you your strengths. I told you what you're doing well. I think you could be applying your strengths better in this area, right? And so I'm doing it right now with you. You're a new boss. I've just spent the last 30 minutes talking to you. You're a very easy guy to get along with. You're competent. You have a degree in computer engineering and a lot of really good in-depth experience in smaller companies with authority. And you're 60 days in and you've not used it. You've not sat down in front of someone and kind of used some of your authority to say, here's what I'm seeing. I'm the manager. Here's what I like. Here's what I'd like to see more of out of you. Is that fair? And then you can ask them 60 days in, how am I doing? How am I doing as a manager? What do you want to see more out of me? What do I do that gets you motivated? What do I do how much more available do I need to be? Do you like to communicate by email, by phone, by Zoom? Like all those questions, there's no reason you can't go just reset right now. And it's actually a very logical time. 2 months. I just wanted to observe for 2 months. And I want to kind of tell you, because as an employee, I always, and especially if you have young people, I always wanted to know what my boss thought of me at any given time. I just want to know, where do I stand with this person? How do they see my performance? Do they know my strengths? Do they even understand what a catch they have in me, how hard I work, how much I care, what I'm good at? So for me as a manager, I've always tried to just be hyper cognizant of the fact that people wanted to know what I thought. And
That's great.
and there's nothing worse than a passive aggressive boss that doesn't tell you what they think. So the good, the bad, the ugly, you should share it and tell them, I want us to have a really honest relationship. So I'm going to be really honest here with you and give you a lot of feedback, but I want it right back because I don't have all the answers. This is another great time in this little 60-day checkup is where you say, let's get this on the table. I've been a manager all of 60 days in my life.
Own it.
I'm not perfect. I have not been to Harvard Business School to learn how to manage people. I'm learning this as I go. And so anything you give me in feedback to get better, I promise to incorporate. And I promise that I'm going to keep getting better, but I don't know how to get better if you can't give me feedback. So I'm going to keep learning and get better at this. And, you should expect that I'm going to also be honest on how you can get better at doing your job.
So to make your life easier, Zach, I put a link in the chat. Ian, we can add that to the show notes. It's called a collaborative or strengths interview. Somebody gave me a version of this when I was a young manager, and I used it. I think that I think now's the absolute perfect time between day 60 and 120. If you met with all 7 people and you went through this. And then the other thing is you can manage tighter. Like you came in a little loose, you can manage tighter. We've got to wrap this up in a second, but one of the things that I think is prudent is this. Ian gave me this advice years ago and I wasn't ready to hear it. If there's a non-performer on your team, petition to get rid of them. Because what it does is very quickly, I'm likable, but I'm also firm. And it shows that. If there's nobody on that, but there's somebody who's maybe not performing incredibly well, a performance plan, something along those lines, but hey, I'm likable, I'm easy to get along with, but you must perform. And there's an axiom in this, like Ian and I were raised by school teachers. School teachers always think that every kid is great. What I realized in the last downturn is that if I'm not great, I get fired. And that's what happened to a bunch of people. But as a manager, if your people aren't performing great, as a manager, you get fired. So you have to hold people accountable and you have to hold them to certain standards. And if you don't do it, they don't come for them, they come for you. So, but this to me is the first step in that process of really acclimating and doing a great job of understanding it. The other piece is this: when you interview again and you say, hey, on my own, I went and researched how to manage. I talked to people who are great managers, allegedly. I found some tools. I use those tools. These are the things I did on my own. You're showing initiative, you're showing a plan. You're going to then calibrate off of it. These are great things that you can utilize throughout your career. And then when it's time to sell yourself, you go walk in that room to interview for whatever that next role is, and you pound your chest because you're like, these are the things that I did without any guidance. Like that's gumption. Those are incredible, incredible things to talk about.
Yeah, that's great to know. You've definitely added a few points to my talking list to what I wanted to talk to my peers about, but also what I can talk to my boss about as I do my performance reviews and talks with them.
That's it.
So on the delegating front, I think it's worth spending another 5 minutes just get into this because I know you want some help on this. So from a consulting perspective, there's so many reasons why people aren't good at delegating. And usually with a new manager, you want to you want to show your team your chops. You want to show them I'm pretty good at this stuff. 2, it's kind of all you know the individual contributor stuff. So you end up doing stuff that really should fall on your people's desk.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, I don't know what else to do. I'm getting paid this new big salary. So let me just jump in and grab some stuff. There's also a little bit of control freak of not wanting things to go wrong. I'm feeling a lot of pressure to get results for a whole team, and I don't quite trust them to do it all really well. But regardless of what the reasons are, I think something you should understand as a manager, you're paid more, you're overhead. You are a luxury. In a 4-person company, there is no luxury of manager over 2 of them. You just all doing stuff. So you're a luxury. Your job is to get results from a team of 7 people. And so what I want you to think about is how much stuff lands on your desk that is below your pay grade. How much stuff is landing on your desk that is below your pay grade, which is a higher pay grade than the people who report to you? And whenever that happens, you have to ask yourself, why? Why is that? Am I trying to add value to my team? Am I trying to get them to like me by taking things off of their desk? Is it just habit that these things have been landed on my desk for 6 years and I've done them, but now I'm a manager and I'm not behaving different? But it's a very counterintuitive position in that you need to be thinking about things at your pay grade. And so you have to have your boss define it. At my pay grade, what should a manager be thinking about, paying attention to, managing strategically? And in order to do those things, you can't be doing individual tasks anymore. And I'll give you an example. I work with a home builder in the South, and we just did my delegating module for my training course like 2 weeks ago. And this guy had just started managing construction managers. So they made him like the region manager of all the CMs underneath him. So he had maybe like 10 project managers under him. And he found himself, and he had been promoted up from one of their peers. But I was asking him, because he struggled to delegate, give me an example of something you keep getting dragged into. And he was like, well, one of our window suppliers has just been late on everything and they're not responsive. And so I have a relationship with the owner of this window supplier. I've known him forever. And so the first time it happened, I called and got an answer for him right away and got him to jump through hoops for us. Well, now it's to the point where anytime they don't answer a phone, my guys are asking me, can I help? Can I help get the window supplier involved? And he's like, and the more we were talking, the more he was realizing like, oh, like, so what's happened is his team delegates up all the time. Like, hey, Barry at Windows R Us isn't responding again. He's like, I'm on it. And so he jumps every time his team says, we need your help. And I said, okay, let me ask you a question. Would you have ever called your boss to call a window supplier when you were managing a backlog of homes? He was like, God, no, I'd be horrified if they had to do that for me. I'm like, yeah, because that was your job, right? Yeah. So okay, why don't you just, the next time someone calls you, say, what have you done to get their attention? How many phone calls have you made? How many different approaches did you take to get it done? And why are you asking me to do your job? I'm giving you a really basic example because that tends to happen at every management job. Is you start by being helpful to show value, to make them like me. And then it starts to become, you become their crutch. And pretty soon you're working for, like, they're delegating everything from their job to you. And that's not to say you don't do things to help your team, but you should be doing things they're not in control of to help them. Taking resistance out of their way, getting them more resources, getting rid of dumb policies that are slowing them down. That's your job, to help them in those ways, because they can't control those things. But things they're in control of that they should just be doing as a course of their job, things that you did when you were in their job, you should not be doing for them. That you should go out of your way to not do those things for them.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Two things. First, with what Ian just said, how does it make you feel? And be honest.
It's actually, yeah, uncomfortable for sure. And it's a perspective I hadn't thought about before. So I'm going through my head and thinking about how this might play out, and definitely a bit uncomfortable.
So let's play this out for a minute as we finish. What's a way that you could say something to somebody if they bring something that's below your pay grade? What's a way that you could set the table prior to them even coming to you with it? What's in these strengths interviews that you're going to go do? How could you set expectations? Like, again, I'm putting you on the spot. I'm going to help you, but like, what is your immediate reaction?
So currently my immediate reaction would be to dig into it and take it on myself. I think one easy thing to start doing is what Ian said, is just kind of ask them, okay, what approaches have you taken before you come to me? And set that expectation that they should take one or two approaches before coming to me.
These things don't come to me. Nobody comes to me and asks me to do their work because I don't let it. It doesn't go that way to Ian. Right now, I've got a much bigger staff than Ian, but what I do is I talk about what I'm focusing on, how that affects their day-to-day. And I've got, 8 different divisions of people. A week ago, I went through and I did a roll call of what my 8 days look like, banker meetings, all these different things that are big. And I talked about what the perspective was. They don't want to bring me a roofing subcontractor because they know it gets in the way of the bigger picture. But once they start to see that this is what Zack is working on, I can't bring him these piddly things. I need to bring him big stuff. Or, hey, I'm hitting a roadblock. Can you help me move it? But these things don't happen immediately. They happen over time. People take the path of least resistance. They know if you just got promoted, you're good at it. So let me ask him to solve my problem. But it's not good. It's like I have a 3-year-old. He wants to eat sugar at every meal. You can't let him do that. And that's your job to prevent that from happening. And then how you do it long term is you build yourself into a go-to for the higher level stuff, for career development, for big picture, for planning. They sit down with you once a quarter over coffee and talk about what their next 12 months looks like. And that's how you become a mentor. And does that make sense? You don't get mired in the crap and you get to look up.
Yeah, that's 2 great points, because I tend to hide my new responsibilities from them because I didn't think it was relevant to them. But to say it like that and have that take some things off my plate, that's a great point.
So I'll give you another example of this. The guy that I'm starting a technology startup with now, he's obviously much more experienced. He's very talented, but he worked for me right out of college, and he was one of my first hires. And as a new sales manager, I had him in the field, so he was going and meeting with customers all the time. And he sucked at sales, and he knew it. He just wasn't good. And it's because he didn't have the skill yet. He hadn't learned the skill like any skill. But he would get out in the field and he would go see a customer and nothing would happen. And so he would ask me to come on visits with him, and I would come and I would listen. But what I was doing wrong, I'm still in my early 20s. I'm a brand new manager. I would take over the meetings. I would start asking the questions. I would start closing. Right. I would get orders. And then he would be like, magic. When Ian comes, I get sales. When Ian doesn't come, I don't get sales. So what I was doing inadvertently, I was there to help. I was there to listen and see what he was doing wrong. And I would coach him afterward. But this went on for months where I didn't even notice it was happening. Every week, it was just popping up on my calendar because I was local. My guys were all over the Midwest, but he was a local Chicago guy. So he'd be like, hey, can you pop down to Exxon with me? Didn't you know? Or can you come out to US Steel? I got that on Friday. And yep. And I wanted to add value and I wanted to help him, but I became a crutch. And what I realized after a little bit is I'm stunting his growth. By me being there, he's not forced to look like a clown. He's not like, I didn't have anyone to do that for me. So I would go to these meetings and not get sales and be like, I better get better. I better learn how to do this. He wasn't getting better because I was going to every freaking meeting with him and I was doing all the selling and he was sitting there taking notes and saying, thank you. And so I had to sit down and say like, man, I'm not helping you by going to these. I feel like I'm taking over these meetings. You need to grow a little. You can go to these meetings. You can call me before and you can prep, but I can't do this for you anymore. And part of the reason I had to do this, I had 20 sales guys working for me and I was spending all my time with one, and it wasn't one of the best salesmen. I need to be spending my time with the top 5 to see what's in your way. How do I help you sell more? So 2 things happened. He became a better salesperson by me saying, okay, training wheels are off. And I became a better manager because I started spending time with all of my team and learning about a broader set of problems they were facing than just spending all of my time with David, in the front line. So not just you'll be a better manager by delegating, your team will grow more by you saying, you know what, I know you're asking me to jump into this, but let's go back to what I just told you a couple of weeks ago. I think you could solve this better than I could. You're an incredible programmer. Why can't you just go do this? Tell me if you get stuck, come back and tell me, but I trust you. Why don't you go do this? And after a while, they'll quit coming to you with those things. They'll be like, we kind of know how Zach's going to respond. He's going to tell us to do our job.
Yeah, those are good points. I definitely relate to that first scenario, and it might be tough, but I'm going to put these in place and give these a shot.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, Zach, this has been a blast, dude. We had a lot of fun.
It's been fun,
we could have talked to you for 3 hours on this. You got our email address, so you got us as contacts. We won't charge you if you send us an email and ask for some help on this, but you've been an awesome guest and pretty impressive what you've done in your career so far. So we'll be watching and rooting for you to go start your own company soon enough.
Maybe. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on and all the advice.
Keep us posted. Best of luck.
Will do. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Zach.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. That was a fun episode. If you liked it, please share it with someone. We're always looking to gain our following. We used to say dozens and dozens, but that'd be a little too self-deprecating. We are now over 20,000 downloads just this past month. So appreciate all of you that tune in every week and are helping to make this one of the fastest growing business podcasts at Apple Podcasts. Thank you very much. And if you want to be a guest on this show, reach out to us and ask. We might just say yes.